Today we are going to have a masterclass on emotional resiliency and why that is going to be the thing, the key aspects that you need to master in 2024 and forward to actually get to your goals, whether it's fitness goals, mindset goals, or just life goals. The principles that I want to talk about in terms of how to bolster stress and resilience apply in all aspects of our lives. These principles are principles that apply both to major life stressors, for example, illness or breakup of relationships or job loss, but they also apply to everyday stressors. You're angry with your boss, your idea has been stolen at work, you applied for a job that you really wanted but you didn't get. These principles also apply to stressors that others put on you. For example, there's a change in the workplace and suddenly your role has shifted in ways that you never imagined. But equally, it applies to stress that you have chosen in your life. Because one of the great myths of stress is that all stress is bad. We don't get to grow in our lives. We don't get to enjoy and find meaning in our lives unless we walk towards discomfort. So for example, if you had started a company and it's a company that you really believe in and you want to be involved with, you may still find it stressful. And not all stress is bad. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in this masterclass is how to navigate these different ways of experiencing stress, both wanted and unwanted. So if we think about the idea of stress, if we think about the idea of resiliency, how to grow and how to thrive, really what we're fundamentally talking about is a key question that I hope we can discover together today. What does it take internally in the way we deal with our thoughts, our emotions, the stories we tell ourselves, and the experiences that we have every day in all aspects of how we love, how we live, how we parent, how we work, how we lead? That so many people came to me and said things like, just be positive, everything will be okay, if you just think positively, everything will be fine, just grit through it, and you'll see you'll come out on the other hand. But I wasn't fine. Some of my personal experiences were very isolating. Some of those were something that my peers had not gone through. So on the one hand, I had this whole narrative of just think positive and everything is going to be okay and if everything is going to be fine, but I wasn't complete. It didn't feel right. And I'm sure you're going to recognize this. And then I had this remarkable experience. I had a teacher, and this teacher knew what I was going through at some point, and she invited me along with the rest of the class to keep journals. So I began this secret silent correspondence with this remarkable person where every day I would write in this journal what I was going through, my regrets, my losses, my sense of isolation, my struggling, my guilt that I was, for example, having fun sometimes when other people were struggling. And every day I would hand in this journal and I would get the most beautiful, heartfelt comments, questions, stories from this amazing person. Now, what I realized after that experience many years ago is that it was someone seeing me. But most importantly, it was me seeing myself, and that is the key that ultimately helped me to be more resilient and thrive beyond that experience. And of course, I now had many experiences and many difficult transitional experiences, but with a sense of myself as someone who can cope and navigate change in ways that are effective. So that sparked my coaching as well. What is it in terms of what society tells us versus what is the reality of how we can work through a world that is not perfect? How we can walk through a world when life's beauties is inseparable from its rigidity, where things happen and change is constant. All these relationship, work, personal stressors are something that all of us experience. On the one hand, this idea of just think positive versus this experience with this journal, this experiencing being seen, showing up to my emotions, is that I started to delve into the research and work with myself and others. So what does it really take for us to thrive in an imperfect, ever-changing, stressful, and complex world? What are these key principles? So the first is that we actually know that forcing positive thinking doesn't work. The narrative is that we should think positive and be positive all the time. There are some key problems with it. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-happiness or anti-being positive. I'm a very positive person to most people. And in fact, I coach people to find their own fulfillment, happiness, and joy. But what we know from the research is that so often when we slap on a happy face, when underneath us we're struggling with sadness or anger or grief or disappointment, what this does is it takes away from our opportunity to learn, to grow, and to ultimately be resilient. Now, why is this? Firstly, when we're feeling something inside, and instead what we do is we just pretend and we try to push those emotions aside. We know from research that there is this remarkable psychological effect that is called amplification. And amplification is this. Imagine you're on a diet and you've decided you're not gonna eat chocolate cake. So you don't want to even think about it. And what you resist persists. So if I say, don't fall, your mind is, for example, bringing up a picture of you or someone else or something falling, right? What we know is that trying not to think about something leads to a boomerang effect, where you start thinking about that all the time. You can even start dreaming about that thing that you feel you cannot have. And we know that the same applies with difficult situations. So when we are upset because we didn't get a promotion, or when you're angry at a team member who you feel is not pulling their weight, but you decide that you just push it aside and get on with it and focus on the project, ignore it, often what that leads to is a boomerang effect, where you start thinking about it more and more often, where in a meeting you'll end up being snappy to that very colleague, or you're gonna start building a slight, almost invisible at first, but growing resentment, and we know where that leads us. Now, just to be clear, I'm not talking about wearing your emotions on a sleeve or always letting your emotions out, but I'm suggesting that when we are struggling with something, one of the key principles of resilience is showing up to your emotions, in the same way as that teacher did with me, in the same way I did it with myself. Being able to say, what is it that I'm feeling? What is going on for me here, right now, is a critical aspect of our resilience. Now, one of the other reasons that positive thinking is not necessarily doing the work is that our emotions have evolved to help us survive as a species. So we need our emotions. We need our fear. We need our anger. Yes, they often feel uncomfortable, and yes, they often are not things that are pleasant, but these emotions often contain signals to the things that we most care about in the world. So for example, when you are feeling stressed because of change in the workplace, that is connected with job security, and that security is really important to you. And then at the moment, your job might not feel as secure as you thought. If you're angry and stressed because someone stole your idea at work, what that signals to you is that you have a key value, which is around equity and fairness. So when we push our emotions aside in the service of a smiley face, what we're doing is we're very often stealing from ourselves some key learning of what are my values that sit underneath these emotions. What is this emotion telling me about my situation? And now, very importantly, is the fact that you feel an emotion, and that doesn't mean that the emotion is right. It doesn't mean that because you are angry with your boss, you should be angry with your boss, and your boss is wrong and you're right. It might be the case, but emotions are data, they're feedback, they're not directions, they're not truth, they're not you. So we can look into our emotions as pieces of information, and that often contains signals to things that we value. But we don't necessarily need to have them drive us. I talked about how we often get hooked into our emotions, believing them and acting on them in ways that don't necessarily serve us. So what I'm talking about here is that our emotions' content signals are important, and that when we push our difficult emotions and our difficult thoughts aside, what it actually does is it undermines our resilience and undermines our learning. Now, we often push our emotions aside with the best of intentions, because society tells us to, or because that's the way we've been raised, or because we've got big projects to do and putting our emotions aside seems effective. You know, I always talk about seeing patterns in how we feel, act, and behave. And here is one of the reasons why. If you put your emotions aside, just one day because you got a big project or you're going to a job interview, that's not a huge deal. But when you start using characteristic waves where time and time again your thoughts go, I'm stuck in my job, but at least I've got a job, so I'm just going to ignore it. When it becomes a trend in your life around a particular emotion or a particular experience, that's when you need to start paying attention to the fact that you're likely, even with good intentions, undermining your resilience. So what we want to be able to do is to show up to our emotions, to recognize that positive thinking is maybe well and good in some situations, but in really dealing effectively with stress and in helping to cultivate resilience, positive thinking is very often toxic and actually damaging. And we know from multiple research that people who chase too much happiness and too much positive thinking actually become less happy over time. So what does this mean when you're dealing with difficult situation? What do you do with that stress? I'm angry with my boss, I'm frustrated with my coworker, I'm stuck in my job. There's all this change going on. I'm ill, or my relationship isn't working out. Often what we find and what I talk about in emotional resilience is that people tend to use one of two strategies. They will either do what I mentioned before, which is what we call bottle. They bottle their emotions, or they're a brooder. Brooding meaning overthinking or spiral thinking, and the exact definition being engage in or showing deep thought about something that makes one sad, angry, or worried. So a bottler is someone who pushes their emotions inside in order to get through the day or achieve their goal, but ultimately those emotions come back, and what they're doing is they're not actually hearing the data from their emotions. When we keep saying to ourselves, I'm just going to ignore it, we're avoiding the very situation that is causing this stress. We are not changing, shaping, tweaking, or managing that situation in a proactive and constructive way. So the stress stays and the situation stays. Bottling ultimately doesn't work. But what about its opposite? What about brooding? Often when people are feeling stressed, they brood. Oh my goodness, I'm so stressed. I feel stuck in my job. This is terrible. What should I do? Now I'm stressed that I'm thinking about this, right? It creates that spiral. And we can also, of course, co-brood when everyone else at work is stressed, when everyone is going through change, and we all hang out at the coffee machine telling each other how stressed we are. That can make us feel better about our coworkers and kind of normalize the emotion of the situation. But what we know from the research is that, again, it undermines our resilience and undermines our capability to work through the situation. So brooding is where you go over and over and over and over your emotions time and time again. And while that is the opposite of bottling, we know that brooding has a similar consequences. So you often feel stuck in a world that you aren't making effective changes, that you want a new environment, and you're ultimately being in your world rather than being in the world. But in brooding, or sometimes people go from one to the other, where they avoid their emotions and then they're brooding later on, these are actually associated with low levels of well-being, higher levels of anxiety, higher levels of burnout, and higher levels of stress over time. So they're not effective strategies. So what do? We need to be able to show up to our emotions, and I'm going to talk very shortly about a few simple strategies to do this. But what am I feeling? What is going on for me? I'm struggling here. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling stressed. My body's feeling this way. These are critical things to start tapping into ways that ultimately help you to be more effective. A key part of a resilience also is doing what I call self-care and self-kindness. So often when people are going through difficult, stressful change situations, they beat themselves up. They're going through a divorce and they blame themselves. They're going through a job loss and they're blaming themselves. They're not going to see the results, they're blaming themselves. They had a failure at work, they blame themselves, and so on and so on. So we live in a society that would often have us believe that we are running a never-ending Ironman competition, and that somewhat being kind to ourselves is about being weak, is about being lazy, or is about being dishonest. What the research shows is that people who are kind to themselves and people who have compassion with themselves and others recognize that they're doing the best with what they've got with who they are, with the resources that they have in the world today, and that they're all kind to themselves, treating themselves with compassion. Those individuals, what they're ultimately doing is creating a safe space within themselves, and that space is psychologically safe, where they are safe from themselves. Now, this internal psychological safety, what does it do? Firstly, it helps people being more motivated. It helps people to grow more. It helps people to recover from setbacks. So a myth of self-compassion is that it is about being weak, lazy, and lying to yourself. We know that the opposite is true, and that self-compassion is a prerequisite for resilience, for thriving, for change, actually for seeing quicker and better results. And I see this with my clients all the time. So how do we get to a space where we show up effectively to our emotions? I'm going to give you some key and very practical strategies. The first, when you experience a difficult emotion, we know that many people use stock standard phrases to describe that emotion. So they'll say something like, I'm stressed, I'm stressed, I'm stressed. And soon everybody at work is talking about how stressed they are. But there is a world of difference between being stressed versus angry, versus fearful, versus disappointed, versus I thought my career would be so much more than it is, and I have a real sense of loss in my life right now. Now imagine I'm coaching a business owner and that person says, I'm stressed. If I just took that stress at face value, I might say to the person, well, let's learn how to get a team. Let's learn how to delegate. But what if the stress is on the wrong career choice? At that point, advice about delegation just doesn't cut it. This is what most people encounter day in, day out when they voice their problems to people. And they get unwanted advice or advice that then they take and it doesn't really work out. So know that a critical aspect of resilience in well-being is that instead of labeling emotions with the first emotion that comes to mind, try to be more granular. What are two other options of what I'm experiencing here? Where is this sitting in my body? Where does it look like if I had to describe it with colors or sounds or visually? Because we know that when people get to a more granular level around their emotions, what it ultimately does is it helps them to understand the cause of emotion, the reality of the situation effectively, and it also enables them to stop planning change. So we know that when you put things into words, that actually starts to activate the readiness potential in our brains, the part of brains that helps us to set goals and to work forward towards change. So living emotions is critical. Become better at being in it with what I call CNC, curiosity and compassion. Breathe in and out while you do this to calm down the nervous system, slow down, feel safe in the present moment. Another very potent strategy is you sitting in a meeting and you're feeling undermined, you're feeling stressed. Notice your thoughts and your feelings for what it is. Your thought is a thought, it's not a fact. Your emotion is an emotion, it's not a fact. Who's in charge? The thinker or the thought? Who's in charge? The thinker or the emotions? Well, you, the individual who is big enough and full enough and complex enough and beautiful enough to experience a multitude of emotions. So when you were sitting in a meeting and you're saying to yourself, I'm angry, I'm just going to shut down, there is no point in talking. Instead, notice your thought or feeling for what it is. I'm noticing that my body is feeling anxious. I'm noticing that my body is feeling anger. I'm noticing the urge to shut down. I'm noticing that I'm not putting my hand up when in fact I really want to. I'm noticing the feeling. I'm noticing the thought. Just doing something this small, we're doing something that is actually critical psychologically. So we move ourselves into a space where instead of watching the emotion, push it aside, we are with it, but we also have ruling on the emotion. Instead, we're seeing the emotion for what it is. We are observing the emotion. And this ability to take an observer stance is critical to our game here. So if we think, for example, an experience of depression. When people feel depressed, and I've been there, so I know what this feels like, and I talk to people that have experienced all kinds of depressive states and low energy states, then we often feel that this is something that is here to stay. I feel surrounded by this emotion. Everything is painted with the same color and is contagious. And so we know this practice of starting to cultivate the ability to notice our emotions with courage, with curiosity, with compassion is our cornerstone to resilience. Let's talk very briefly for a second about another critical strategy, that is knowing your why. What do I mean by this? When we're going through change and stress, it is easy for us to be caught up in what is called social contagion. Social contagion is where everybody in the office is experiencing stress and we feel stress. Everybody is going on their phones in the elevator and we pick our phone up in the elevator. We know, for example, in some research that if you're sitting on an airplane and your seat partner buys candy, even if you don't know the person, you're 30% more likely to buy candy. So we get automatically very frequently impacted by other people's behaviors and other people's emotions in ways that become contagious and in ways that ultimately undermine our own resilience, where we compare ourselves and we adopt behaviors, actions, and strategies that ultimately are not who we are. Again, that's why it's extremely important that we cultivate self-awareness and we stay present in the moment as much as we can. And it's also why I always say that we can lead by example, as other people around us will pick on it. So knowing your why is something that we want to explore, and emotionality is one of the most critical aspects to this resilience, to thriving and performance and success in our lives. Knowing who you are, knowing what you stand for, knowing what's important to you is fundamental. And here is an example. Everybody is running around talking about the stress and the change, but you know in your heart that being a contributor is a key value of yours. What that knowledge does is it helps to buffer you, it helps to protect you from the stress of social contagion. Yes, there is all this going on around me, but I still choose to contribute. Knowing, for example, that, let's say, learning and growth are core values to you, not just like back of your mind or in a cheesy way on a vision board, but really something that is personal to you. It helps you to say learning and growth are important. And so while I'm not loving this change, while I'm not loving the stress, I'm still choosing to learn what I can from this situation. And lastly, we talked about our emotions, we talked about values, knowing our why. We also know that we can cultivate real and important habits on the ground that enable us to be resilient and enable us to be effective. So one very important habit is the habit of mindset. And human beings are naturally drawn to situations that feel comfortable. So we may be in a relationship, we may be in a job that we do with our eyes shut down, or that we go out to dinner and we know exactly what we're going to order. Now that feels comfortable, but it's also a sign of what I call overcompetence. So we become so trapped by what feels comfortable that that comfort ultimately creates a prison around ourselves, that we stepped into a cage of comfort that undermines our resilience, stops our growth, and stops our thriving. So while we're all drawn to comfort, there is a cost to comfort, and that is ultimately what weakens our lives. And it weakens our resilience, and it weakens our exploration, it weakens the depth and breadth and richness of our experience. So comfortable is comfortable, but it can be a curse if it's all there is. At the same time, we don't want to be overwhelmed in a way which we always feel like constantly drowning. So we should always, in helping to cultivate our resilience, try to do this. Move yourself towards the edge of your ability, where if you're feeling stressed or stuck in your job, doesn't mean you have to give up that job yet. You can look for ways that you can make small tweaks, small changes that are meaningful, that are value connected, that will help you. So for example, well, I keep saying no to the thing, even if I know that by doing this project, this will help me grow. How can you move yourself knowing that your value is one of growth and keep on making what I call toward moves when you are at the choice point? Do you make a move away from your value of growth, or do you make a move that is towards? Is this a plus or a minus towards that value? Not the goal in itself, the value that you want to live out of. And putting your hand up and saying yes, as long as the thing is meaningful to you, is value connected, it will help you grow and take action. And very important is also that, again, stress has a bad name. So people talk about trying to avoid stress and try to do away with stress. And there is no such thing as living a meaningful life, raising kids, having an effective career, having a healthy, fit body, and living a life of purpose, a meaningful life, a rich life that does not involve stress and problems. Discomfort is guaranteed. It is normal and it's necessary, and it's kind of like the price of the admission. So what that means is recognizing that we don't get to climb Mount Everest without having some cold, dark, rainy, shitty days. It's really important that being able to move towards stress often, and as long as it, again, is value aligned, is a critical aspect. And within that, recognizing this, that we're not trying to do away with stress, we're not trying to do away with discomfort, we're not moving away from fear, because courage ultimately is not the absence of fear, it's not the absence of stress. Courage is about noticing your stress, noticing emotions with curiosity and compassion, and still choosing to move in the direction of your values. So lastly, creating in your life what I call 1-2 habits. If you find yourself having a daily stress, that is what we call an allostatic stress, this everyday stress. What we need to start doing is cultivating habits that ultimately enable us to mitigate and manage those stressful situations. So an example, one of the things that many experts talk about is habit stacking or piggyback, which is the idea that if you already have an automatic thing you do in your life, with something that is already a habit, you already go home and put your keys in that specific drawer, and you do that every day, you can piggyback that with a new habit onto this existing habit. So we need to create these habits not just for the sake of it, but for things that are true want-to habits, value-based, aligned habits that are critical to us to manage stress. And within these, there are also habits around self-care that are fundamental, right, to lifelong resilience and well-being, like getting enough sleep, doing enough exercise, healthy and balanced nutrition, and again, recognizing that these are not because you have to do them, but because they're fundamentally important to you. And of course, we need the habit of cultivating relationships as well, because while we live in a world that is technology driven and we can basically do everything ourselves, it is still the support of others and the human connection that truly enables us to become resilient. We don't need to do everything ourselves. Reason why we need a coach, we need a therapist, we need our family, we need a partner connection. So 1-2 habits is absolutely fundamental to our ability to manage stress and change, and to build that resilience in all aspects of our lives, in how we love, how we live, how we parent, how we work, in how we lead. And I hope this makes you think and gives you some insight, and hopefully you took some notes and you can actually put it into practice already today, already this week. Here at the end, I just want to wrap up and I want to share a couple of things that helped me tremendously during these past weeks. So this is very personal, but I feel, especially as a trans person and someone that has not felt comfortable with my body at all times, I think as trans people, or most trans people that I speak with, at least personally, I think we tend to detach from our bodies and our bodily experience and our body awareness because of dysphoria, dysmorphia, and so on. So enjoying embodiment more and being more regulated in how we put our body out in the world is part of the self-awareness work we do here. And one way to start experimenting with embodiment and body self-awareness could be to ask yourself whether, let's say, as an example, does sound trigger me most or does light trigger me most? Or it could be looking at a body discomfort, kind of a pain that you have, something that bothers you, and looking at it and naming it something different, being that's an interesting sensation instead of labeling it as pain. So playing around with words and feelings and kind of putting more focus on that. You can only experience emotions through the body, as feelings cannot be experienced without a body, which is the reason why if you're watching a movie and you have a surge of sadness or joy, or you cry immediately, or they're showing you a traumatic experience on a screen, you can empathize with that, you can feel it in your body, you see it, you rationalize it, you might even cry or have an emotional and body reaction, but after 2 hours, even if you watch something traumatic, you're not traumatized by it. So this is why it is fundamental that we use the body as well as the mind in dealing with emotional resiliency. And the thing that helped me the most lately has been getting the habit of starting noticing how I feel during the day. even when things go well. And I stopped and checked in with myself. If I'm feeling grateful, I state it, I declare it. Or if I'm feeling joyful, I'll declare it, I'll tell it to myself. And when anxiety or frustration or nervousness or sadness would come up, I would start noticing it and picture it as an image, as well as trying to locate it in my body. Then I would take a deep breath, put a hand on my heart or my chest, close my eyes, and simply say, my body is feeling anger. Or something like, my body is feeling somewhat anxious. And then I would add, and that is what is so. Deep breath, and basically just let it be. Noticing it, mentioning it, saying my body is feeling anger, not I am anxious. Because I'm just having a feeling and I'm noticing it, so it's my body having that reaction. And then adding, and that is what is so. Deep breath, move on. And it's extremely important that we simply state what we know is right in the moment, right in the body, whatever comes up, top of mind, without analyzing or judging or criticizing, just experiencing it. And at the same time, we also need to be willing to let go of the rational mind and let rationality down, as the body does not speak rational mind language. So once you've done this exercise of stating it, you can also add tapping. And the important thing is that you stimulate these acupuncture points in your body. You close your eyes, you just state what your feeling is going on. So I would just take 2 fingers, curve them, very relaxed, and I would start by massaging a part under my collarbone muscle while simply saying something like, these feelings of anger, all these feelings, all this anxiety, or this frustration. And then I would start tapping literally on top of, in all the bony parts, on top of my eye, here on my temple, under my eyes, under my nose, and under my chin or on my chin. And I would just keep repeating all these feelings, all this confusion, all this anger, all this frustration, all this confusion, all this worrying, all this fear. And then I would just put a hand on my heart again, deep breath. Once you've done that, you'll feel yourself being relaxed in the body while attaching and having thoughts of fear, anxiety, sadness, frustration, anger. So it's kind of like the body starts regulating itself. It cannot cope. It's like, how you're feeling so relaxed if these are the feelings. So you're gonna make new connections in your brain, and this is gonna allow you to be able to breathe in, breathe out, and let go and become more clearer in your mind. You can ask yourself, what do you think we should do about it? So I encourage you to try these tools, as they were extremely helpful for me, and to start reconnecting with my body and my emotions, because I tend to do a lot of theoretical work, a lot of energy work and mental work and mindset work, and being in the brain. But it's really helpful to go back to feeling the body and connecting the two, which is also one of the reasons why having fitness, especially if you have certain fitness goals, is not just about going to the gym, it's not just about the nutrition, because emotions and stress and change are a thing in your life. They will, in our holistic approach and your life, you will see how you feel and how you go through your day and what you do, they're gonna all affect each other. They cannot be disconnected. So you cannot just buy a workout plan or download an app, pay $7 a month, and expect that you're gonna get to everything and everything's gonna be solved. That you just need to be disciplined, put in the work, have that, like, go through it. It's way more complicated. And the second we start seeing how complicated it can be, we can make it very, very simple. And with a few techniques, things are gonna become way easier, more enjoyable, more sustainable in the long term. And you're gonna start not only having the body of your dreams or what you feel aligns to you, but also a life that is worth living, getting to that next level, achieving what you want to achieve. So I hope this lesson was helpful for you as well. Consider subscribing. I hope you got a lot out of this. Check the links down below if you wanna follow me on the other social media, or if you wanna ask me about coaching. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.